Okay, we're getting ready to start chapter 7. If you remember, chapter 6 ended with Jacob taking Ellie to the cemetery, and he was crying as he was kneeling down near a headstone. And Ellie didn't understand it, and she wanted to go home. Okay, so we're on page 66, chapter 7. From that day forward, we spent more time away from the kennel. There were a lot of people out there who needed to be found. Sometimes they were adults and sometimes children. Sometimes they were scared, sometimes they were confused, or like Marilyn, not really aware that they were lost. But most were happy to see us. Sometimes we would ride on airplanes or helicopters. "You're a chopper dog, Ellie," Jacob always told me when we took off. The first time the noise made me nervous, but after that I understood that airplanes and helicopters were something like the truck. They got us to where work needed to be done. The humming that I could hear and even feel through the metal floor started to make me drowsy after a time or two, and I'd usually doze off. When I woke up, Jacob and I would go to work. One day, Jacob took me in the truck to the biggest pond I'd ever seen. There were a lot of people there, but a man and a woman ran toward the truck when we pulled up, talking frantically before Jacob even let me out of the cage. The woman pulled a limp purple sweatshirt from a big bag over her shoulder, and Jacob held it down for me to smell. "Can your dog really?" the woman began, sounding like she was about to cry. "I mean, we're not even sure how long it's been. I thought for sure Charlotte was playing with a few other kids down by the water, and then when I looked up she wasn't there. They didn't even remember seeing her leave." Now the woman was crying for real, and the man put an arm around her. "Ellie's very good," Jacob said calmly. "We just need to let her do her job. Find Ellie." I sniffed the sweatshirt deeply. Sunscreen, salt, ketchup, a smudge of ice cream, strawberry-smelling shampoo, and a little girl. Now I knew who I was searching for. I put my nose down to the sand. It smelled different. I tracked people across grass, dirt, sidewalks, and roads, but this was something new. Everything smelled damp and salty, and there was a strong, wet, powerful scent of seaweed in the air, threatening to swallow up the fragile smell of a little girl. And there were crisscrossing smells of people everywhere. They had been walking all over this sand, coming in and out of the water. I smelled rubber shoes and bear skin and food. So much food. Someone was grilling hot dogs. Jacob sometimes cooked those on the stove and let me have a taste. So delicious. It was hard to resist the temptation to lift my head up and take in a big breath of that lovely smell, but I kept my head down. I was working. I paced back and forth, making my way down toward the water. It was very strange water. The smell of salt from it was strong. I thought that the fountain Jacob had jumped into was big, but it was huge, and it moved. It growled, too, as though it were angry. I would rather have stayed far away from it, but the girl's trail was leading right toward it. I had to follow. Then the water, to my surprise, swept up close to my paws. I had been following the trail right across the sand, and all of a sudden the water rolled up to me and then back. The smell had been washed away. I jumped back in surprise. "It's okay, Ellie," Jacob said. He followed close behind me. "Find." That wasn't fair, the water coming up to wash the smell away. Irritated, I set to work harder. The trail must be somewhere. I found it again in less than a minute. The little girl had been wandering close to the water's edge. The water kept moving, trying to trick me, but every time I lost the trail, I found it again. My nose stayed right down near the ground. "Doggy, doggy," a high voice said, and little hands were patting me. A tiny boy grabbed at my fur and giggled. His hands were sticky with salty water and drips from a popsicle, and ordinarily I would have licked them clean. "Will he bite?" asked a woman nervously. "She won't bite, but she's working," Jacob said from behind me. "Could you please?" But I could already tell this wasn't the child I was supposed to find. So I gently walked around him and kept going, moving quicker and quicker. Jacob was falling behind. Something round landed in the sand beside me, and I looked up, startled. "Fetch!" a teenage boy yelled. I nosed at the thing. It was hard and plastic and looked like it might be nice to chew, but it wasn't work. I kept going. The girl's smell left the water. I followed it up the sloping sand and felt it growing stronger. I looked up to see a playground with more young humans than I had ever seen running wildly around. They slid down slides and climbed up ladders just as I had learned to do. But they didn't seem to treat it as seriously as work should be treated. They were playing and making a lot of noise doing it. The tracks of so many children crossed and crisscrossed the sand, and the smell I was following was buried. I paced back and forth, turning in a half circle. Where had it gone? I lifted my nose and tried the air. She was close. She must be close. I'd find the smell again if I just didn't give up. And I did. There she was, sitting on a seesaw with a little boy at the other end. She flew up in the air, giggling, and then thumped down in the sand. I turned back to Jacob. "Show me," he said, looking at my face. I dashed across the playground. "Dog, doggy, can I pet your dog?" children called out as I ran. The girl thumped in the sand, bouncing in her seat as I came up to her. Jacob followed me. "Charlotte?" he said. "Are you Charlotte?" "Uh-huh." The little girl looked up and laughed. "I want to play at the playground," she shouted happily. "I want to stay." When Charlotte was back with her parents, her mother cried some more, and Charlotte cried when her parents said she had to leave the playground and go home. Jacob snapped my leash on and scratched behind my ears. "Want to play in the ocean, Ellie?" he asked. He took me down to the water. It kept sneaking up and trying to get me wet. I jumped back and barked. Once I tried to bite the bubbly white water that swirled over my paws. Jacob actually chuckled a little. It was a happier sound than I'd ever heard from him before. He found a stick and tossed it in the shallow water. Cautiously, I waded out to get it. The water sloshed around my feet and brushed against the fur on my belly. But it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I felt anxious, though, worried Jacob might go out in the water and sink in it. The thought was frightening. I snatched the stick up, tasted salt and wood, and raced back to Jacob, splashing all the way. For once, there was a real smile on his face. "This is the ocean, Ellie, the ocean," he told me, and threw more sticks until I was running in without any hesitation to get them, dashing in and out of the waves, wet from nose to tail. I was happy. Jacob was not going to sink. He remained safely on the shore, grinning. I felt that thing that had such a tight clench on Jacob's heart loosen just a little as we played. Okay, that's the end of Chapter 7.